There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the camouflage of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, or the familiar weight of a friend leaning against you on a couch. You don't recognize them as fault lines until much, much later, when you look back and see the exact point where the entire landscape of your world shifted, where the tectonic plates of your heart slid into a new and terrifying alignment. For me, that moment smelled like Julian's shampoo, a clean, sharp scent of sandalwood and something green that I could never quite place, and it felt like the rhythmic, trusting press of his breathing against my side. He was asleep, or pretending to be, and I was a statue carved from equal parts hope and terror, my own lungs forgetting their function. And then, in a voice thick with a sleep that might have been real and might have been a shield, he mumbled the words that would become both the lock and the key to everything that followed. This doesn't mean anything. You know, his breath was warm against the fabric of my t-shirt. His arm was draped across my stomach, his fingers loosely curled near my hip, a gesture of such casual ownership that it made my bones ache. His head was pillowed on my shoulder, tucked into the curve of my neck, and I could feel the soft tickle of his hair against my jaw. He held me like I was an anchor in a storm, a fixed point in a spinning world. He held me like it meant everything. And my heart, that stupid, stubborn organ, chose to believe the evidence of his touch over the defense of his words. It was a choice that would nearly break me, but it was also the only choice I was capable of making. To understand the weight of that moment, the impossible gravity of it, you have to understand the foundation upon which we were built. Julian and I were a structure of our own design, erected over a decade of shared pizzas, late-night study sessions, and the kind of easy, unvarnished friendship that feels more like a law of nature than a conscious choice. We met in college, two disparate elements drawn together in the chaotic crucible of a freshman dormitory. He was the brilliant engineering student, all frantic energy and bright, loud laughter, a human supernova who drew people into his orbit with an effortless charm. His room was a disaster of circuit boards, empty coffee cups, and textbooks left open to complex equations that looked like a secret language. He moved through the world with a confident stride, as if he knew exactly where he was going and had already calculated the most efficient path to get there. I, on the other hand, was a quiet observer, an art major specializing in photography. I lived in a world of light and shadow, of composition and stolen moments. My side of our shared suite was a curated space of quiet order, books stacked by color, a single thriving fiddle-leaf fig in the corner, and prints of stark, black and white landscapes pinned to a corkboard. Where Julian spoke in paragraphs, I spoke in sentences. Where he filled a room with his presence, I preferred to find a quiet corner and watch it unfold. I learned people by studying the way light caught the dust motes dancing around them, the way their smiles didn't always reach their eyes, the subtle tension in their hands when they were trying to hide something. I was a collector of unspoken things, and from the very beginning, Julian was the most fascinating subject I had ever encountered. Our friendship shouldn't have worked, but it did. It was a strange and perfect alchemy. He pulled me out of my shell, coaxing me to parties with the promise of good music or introducing me to his ever-expanding circle of friends with a proud, proprietary arm slung around my shoulders. "This is Leo," he'd say, his voice booming over the noise. "He's the quiet genius. Sees everything." In return, I offered him a sanctuary. My room became his refuge from the pressures of his demanding coursework, a place where the frantic energy could settle. He would sprawl on my meticulously made bed, complaining about vector calculus or a bug in his code, and I would just listen, letting the cadence of his voice wash over me, a familiar and comforting sound. I was the calm eye of his hurricane, the quiet harbor where his bustling ship could drop anchor. The shift inside me, the moment my feelings for him underwent their own chemical change, was as quiet and unnoticed as the developing of a photograph in a darkroom. It wasn't a sudden cataclysm. It was a slow, creeping saturation. But if I had to pinpoint a single moment of exposure, it was during our junior year. We were at a crowded off-campus party, the air thick with sweat and cheap beer. Julian was across the room, caught in the middle of telling some animated story. A strobe light flickered, catching him in fractured frames of motion. He threw his head back and laughed, a genuine, uninhibited roar of pure joy, and in that instant, the entire noisy, chaotic room fell away. All I could see was him. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the column of his throat, the sheer, unadulterated light that seemed to pour out of him. It was like looking through my camera lens and finding the one perfect, decisive moment. The world snapped into focus, and the truth was there, developed and undeniable in the private darkroom of my own mind. I loved him. It was a terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly hopeless realization. Julian was my best friend. He was also, unequivocally, straight. He dated women with a kind of serial enthusiasm, falling in and out of relationships with a dramatic flair that I documented from the sidelines. There was Amanda, the fiery literature major, then Sarah, the calm and steady pre-med student, and eventually, Chloe, the architect who seemed, for a while, like she might be the one. I played my role perfectly. I was the supportive friend, the listening ear, the one who offered brutally honest advice about birthday gifts and dissected breakup texts with the precision of a surgeon. Each time he brought a new girlfriend to meet me, I would feel a familiar, quiet pang, a little death in the center of my chest. But I would smile, shake her hand, and build a new wall inside myself, reinforcing the boundary between what I felt and what I was allowed to be for him. My love for him became a secret room in the architecture of my heart, a place I visited alone, in the dark. The door was always locked, the existence of the room itself a carefully guarded secret. To risk that secret, to knock on that door and invite him in, was to risk the entire foundation of the life we had built. It was a risk I was never willing to take. The friendship was too precious, too vital. It was the central pillar supporting the roof over my head. I would rather live with the ache of a locked room than risk bringing the whole house down. So I watched, and I waited, and I loved him in silence, content with the unique and profound intimacy of our friendship. I convinced myself it was enough. And for years it was. Until the night Chloe left him, and the first crack appeared in the foundation we had so carefully constructed. The shift began with a sound. It wasn't the frantic, insistent ringing of the doorbell I might have expected, but a soft, hesitant tapping, almost lost in the sound of the rain lashing against my apartment windows. It was nearly midnight. I was in my makeshift darkroom, a converted walk-in closet, gently rocking a tray of developer, watching an image of a winter bear tree slowly emerge from the blank white paper. The soft, red glow of the safe light gave the small space a warm, womb-like feel. The tapping came again, a little more insistent this time. A nervous flutter started in my chest. Julian never knocked like that. He used his key, or he just hammered on the door like he was trying to break it down. Wiping my chemical-scented hands on a towel, I navigated the familiar darkness of my apartment and opened the door. He was standing there, drenched. The harsh yellow light of the hallway carved him into a stranger. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and rain dripped from his eyelashes and the tip of his nose. But it was his face that stopped my breath. The usual vibrant energy that radiated from him, the constant hum of life, was gone. It was like someone had simply turned off the light inside him. His face was slack, his eyes wide and hollow, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. He looked like a building that had been gutted by fire, the strong framework still standing, but everything essential inside turned to ash. "She's gone," he said, and his voice was a raw, broken thing, a piece of gravel scraping against stone. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. "Chloe." I didn't say anything. I just stepped back, pulling the door wider, a silent invitation. He shuffled inside, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor, leaving a small, dark puddle that was a perfect metaphor for the mess he'd brought into my quiet, ordered world. He stood there for a long moment, just inside the threshold, as if he had forgotten how to move. I watched him, my heart a painful knot in my chest. I had seen him through breakups before, had seen him angry and frustrated and sad. But I had never seen him like this. This was not just sadness. It was a profound and terrifying emptiness. He looked lost. "Can I?" He started, his voice faltering. He gestured vaguely around my living room, at the comfortable worn-in couch and the soft pool of light from my reading lamp. "Can I just stay here tonight? I can't be in my place. Everything is." "Hers, of course," I said, my own voice softer than I intended. "You don't have to ask. You know that." He nodded, a jerky, puppet-like motion. I found him a towel and a dry t-shirt and sweatpants of mine, items he'd left here over the years that had been absorbed into my own wardrobe. He changed in the bathroom without a word, and when he emerged, he looked smaller, younger, swallowed by my clothes. We didn't talk about it. The wound was too fresh, too raw. Words would only irritate it. Instead, I made him a cup of tea, the chamomile steam rising in a fragrant cloud between us, and I put on a movie, some mindless action film that required no emotional investment. We sat on the couch, on opposite ends, a respectable and safe distance between us. The only sounds were the movie's explosions and the relentless drumming of the rain outside. About an hour in, he started to shiver. It was a subtle tremor at first, a faint vibration that I could feel through the couch cushions. Then it became more pronounced, a full-body shudder he was trying and failing to control. It wasn't from the cold. The apartment was warm. It was the physical manifestation of shock, of a pain so deep it had turned his very nerves against him. Without thinking, I reached over and pulled the thick wool blanket from the back of the couch, unfolding it and draping it over him. My fingers brushed his arm, and his skin was cold, clammy. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into the small, accidental touch. He shifted just a few inches, closing some of the empty space between us. It was a barely perceptible movement, but to me, it felt like a continental drift. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. He was still watching the movie, his eyes fixed on the screen, but his attention was elsewhere. I could feel it. Another 10 minutes passed in charged silence. Then, slowly, as if his body were moving without his permission, he leaned his head against my shoulder. My entire being went still. Every muscle tensed. I could feel the individual strands of his damp hair against my neck, the solid weight of his skull resting on my collarbone. It was the most terrifying and most wonderful feeling I had ever experienced. 1,000 alarms went off in my head, screaming at me that this was a line, a boundary, a sacred rule being broken. This was not us. We were side by side, not this. But a stronger, quieter voice, the one that had loved him in secret for years, told me to just breathe, to just be still, to let him have this. He needed an anchor, and for some reason, he had chosen me. So I sat there, rigid and unmoving, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and I let him lean. I let him rest his profound and broken weight on me, and I prayed that I was strong enough to hold it. That night was the beginning of the ritual. He didn't go home the next day, or the day after that. His apartment, only 10 blocks away, became a ghost ship he refused to board. My place became his. The guest room I offered when unused. He preferred the couch, he said. It was closer to the living room's white noise, the hum of the city outside my window. I knew it was a lie. The couch was closer to me. And so our evenings fell into a new, unspoken pattern. We would eat dinner, sometimes in silence, sometimes with him talking in disjointed fragments about his day at work, carefully avoiding any mention of Chloe or his empty apartment. Then we would migrate to the couch and put on a movie or a show. And every single night, at some point, he would bridge the gap between us. The ritual had its own subtle, terrifying progression, an evolution of intimacy that I tracked with the detailed precision of a scientist observing a rare and volatile chemical reaction. It began with him simply leaning his head on my shoulder, as he had that first night. For a week, that was the extent of it. It was a position that allowed for a degree of plausible deniability. He was just tired. He was just comfortable. It was innocent. I told myself that over and over, even as my body hummed with a constant, low-grade electricity whenever he was near. I learned the exact weight of his head, the way his breathing would deepen and even out as he drifted off to sleep, the faint, clean scent of his skin. I became a connoisseur of these small, dangerous details. Then, one night, he escalated. He didn't just lean. He slumped, his entire upper body collapsing against my side, as if his own bones could no longer support him. He tucked his arm around my waist, his hand coming to rest on my hip, and he sighed, a deep, shuddering exhalation of pure exhaustion. My heart did a painful, frantic flip in my chest. This was different. This was not the casual contact of friends. This was a deliberate act of seeking shelter. I remained perfectly still, my own arm trapped awkwardly between his body and the back of the couch. I could feel the warmth of him seeping through my shirt, a radiating heat that seemed to travel directly to the core of my being. I wanted to move, to adjust, to put my own arm around him and complete the gesture. But I didn't dare. I was a passive participant, a structure for him to lean on, not an active partner in this strange, new embrace. From there, the boundaries continued to dissolve, melting away slowly like ice in the spring. His hand on my hip became his arm fully wrapped around my stomach. His head on my shoulder migrated down to my lap while I read a book, his face turned towards the cushions, his hair brushing against my jeans. I would rest my hand on his back, telling myself it was a gesture of simple, platonic comfort, even as my traitorous fingers memorized the shape of his shoulder blades through his t-shirt. There were nights he would fall asleep fully curled against me, his long legs tangled with mine, his face buried in my chest, his arms holding me tight, as if he were afraid I might disappear if he let go. I would stay awake for hours on those nights, listening to the sound of his steady breathing, feeling the rise and fall of his chest against mine, and I would be consumed by a feeling so vast and painful it felt like drowning. It was a cocktail of exquisite joy and profound sorrow. Joy, because he was here, he was choosing me, he was holding me. Sorrow, because I knew, or I thought I knew, that it was all built on a lie. It was during one of these nights, when he was wrapped around me so tightly I could barely breathe, that he first said the words. He was in that liminal space between waking and sleeping, his voice a thick, drowsy murmur against my collarbone. "This is nice," he whispered. So quiet. A beat of silence passed, and then he added, as if to himself, or perhaps to a ghost in the room, "This doesn't mean anything, you know. It's just easy." The words were a clean, sharp stab to my heart. He was drawing a line in the sand, creating a verbal firewall to protect himself from the implications of his own actions. He was taking all the beautiful, terrifying intimacy we were sharing and stripping it of its meaning, rendering it safe and sterile. It was a brutal act of self-preservation, and it hurt more than I could have imagined. Because while he was holding me, my body was screaming that it meant everything. My heart was screaming that it meant everything. The secret room inside me was rattling on its hinges, threatening to burst open. But I said nothing. I just made a small, assenting noise in my throat and continued to hold him, letting his denial be the price I had to pay for his closeness. He started saying it more often after that. It became his mantra, his get-out-of-jail-free card. He would say it after a particularly long embrace, or when he woke up in the morning still tangled in my limbs on the couch. "Thanks for this, Leo," he'd say, stretching and avoiding my eyes. It doesn't mean anything, but it really helps. Each time he said it, a small piece of me chipped away. I felt like a fraud, a prop in his personal play about grief and recovery. I was the comfort object, the human weighted blanket, devoid of my own feelings, my own needs. The irony was suffocating. Here he was, in my arms every night, closer to me than anyone had ever been, and yet he was building a fortress of words to keep me at a distance. The physical space between us had vanished, but the emotional chasm felt wider than ever. My internal world became a battleground. One part of me, the pragmatic, self-protective part, urged me to put a stop to it, to tell him he needed to go back to his own apartment, to re-establish the old boundaries before I shattered completely. This nightly ritual was a slow poison, filling me with a hope so potent it was toxic. The longer it went on, the harder the inevitable crash would be. But the other part of me, the part that had been in love with him for a decade, was a desperate, starving thing. It was being fed for the first time, and it couldn't bear the thought of that nourishment being taken away. It was willing to accept the poison as long as it came with the sweetness of his touch. It convinced me to be patient, to endure the sting of his words, because maybe, just maybe, his actions were speaking a deeper truth that his mind wasn't ready to acknowledge. Maybe his body knew what it wanted long before his brain was ready to accept it. So I stayed. I let him hold me. I absorbed his casual denials. I lived on the electric, agonizing edge of our ambiguity, waiting for something, anything, to finally break. The breaking point arrived on a quiet Thursday night nearly 3 months after he had first shown up at my door. The rain had returned, a soft, steady drumming against the glass that felt like a deliberate echo of that first night. We had just finished a movie, a quiet, contemplative foreign film that had left the room steeped in a thoughtful silence. The credits were rolling, casting a soft, flickering glow across Julian's face. He was lying with his head in my lap, but for once, he wasn't asleep. His eyes were open, staring up at the ceiling, his expression unreadable. I was running my fingers through his hair, a gesture that had somehow become a part of the ritual, as normal and accepted as breathing. But tonight, it felt different. The air was charged, humming with a new kind of tension. It wasn't the tension of grief or exhaustion. It was something else, something sharper and more focused. He turned his head, and his eyes met mine. The look in them was so direct, so intensely vulnerable, that it felt like a physical touch. The casual, friendly mask he usually wore was gone. In its place was a raw, searching honesty. He was looking at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as a friend, not as a comfort object, but as me. Leo. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic, panicked thrumming in my ears. My hand froze in his hair. I felt completely exposed, as if he could see right through my skin and into that secret, locked room in my heart. I was sure he could see the years of unspoken feelings cataloged there, pinned to the walls like my photographs. Leo, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It was just my name, but the way he said it was different. It was a question, an opening. I couldn't find my own voice. I just swallowed, my throat suddenly dry, and waited. He slowly sat up, disentangling himself from me, but not moving away. He sat facing me on the couch, our knees almost touching. The space between us felt like a vacuum, pulling all the air from the room. His eyes never left mine. They were dark, wide, and filled with a terrifying mix of fear and something else, something I didn't dare to name. Hope was a dangerous thing, and I had been burned by it too many times. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second in the air before he gently cupped my jaw. His thumb brushed against my cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a jolt of lightning through my entire nervous system. His skin was warm, a little rough. The touch was not one of comfort or friendship. It was a touch of reverence, of inquiry. Would it be okay? He whispered, and the words were so quiet I almost thought I had imagined them. His gaze flickered down to my lips, and then back up to my eyes. The question hung in the air between us, shimmering with the weight of everything unsaid, everything we had been dancing around for months. Would it be okay if I crossed this line? Would it be okay if I shattered everything we thought we were? Would it be okay if this finally meant something? And in that moment, all my fear, all my carefully constructed walls, all my pragmatic self-preservation, it all just turned to dust. All that was left was the raw, aching truth of my love for him. I had been waiting a decade for a question I never believed would be asked. I gave him the only answer I had. I didn't speak. I just closed my eyes and leaned forward, closing the final, infinitesimal gap between us. The kiss was not what I had imagined it would be over the years. In my secret fantasies, it had always been something passionate, desperate, a sudden dam break of years of pin-up emotion. But this was nothing like that. It was impossibly, breathtakingly gentle. It was a question, met with an answer. His lips were soft, hesitant, carefully exploring mine as if he were learning a new and delicate language. It was a kiss of discovery, not of conquest. There was a profound sense of reverence in it, of something fragile and precious being handled with the utmost care. He tasted of the mint tea we had been drinking and something that was uniquely, elementally Julian. I brought my hand up to rest on his chest, feeling the frantic, hammering beat of his heart beneath my palm, a perfect match to my own. It was a quiet confession, a silent agreement. In the space of that single, tender kiss, the entire foundation of our world was demolished, and a new one, terrifying and beautiful, began to be built. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. We just breathed, sharing the same air, the silence in the room no longer heavy with tension, but filled with a fragile, shimmering peace. For the first time, nothing needed to be said. The meaning was finally, terrifyingly, clear. The beautiful, honest silence of that moment did not last. The morning after the kiss was a landscape of brittle quiet and stolen, anxious glances. The fragile peace had evaporated with the dawn, replaced by a thick fog of uncertainty. Julian woke up on the far end of the couch, a chasm of cushions between us that felt more profound than any physical distance we had ever maintained before. He was quiet, his movements stiff and unnatural. He made coffee with a clattering of mugs and spoons that sounded like an alarm in the stillness of my apartment. He wouldn't look at me. When I tried to catch his eye, he would find something intensely interesting about the sugar bowl or the grain of the wooden cabinets. The easy intimacy of the past 3 months had vanished, replaced by the awkwardness of two strangers who had shared something they couldn't take back. I should, get going, he mumbled into his coffee cup. Big day at work. A lot to do, Julian. I started, my voice gentle, but he was already moving, rinsing his mug in the sink with unnecessary force, his back a rigid wall between us. I'll grab my stuff from your room, he said, not specifying which of the many things he had scattered around my apartment he meant. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a single hoodie, as if that one item represented a definitive departure. He pulled it on, a piece of armor against the unspoken things in the room. He walked to the door, and for a horrible, sinking moment, I thought he was going to leave without another word. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, his shoulders hunched. I'll text you, he said, his voice flat. He still wouldn't look at me. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, and the sound echoed in the sudden, crushing silence. I stood in the middle of my living room, the phantom sensation of his lips still on mine, and I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. I had misinterpreted everything. The kiss hadn't been a confession, it had been a mistake. An anomaly born of grief and confusion. He had crossed a line, and was now running back to the safety of the world he knew, a world where we were just friends, a world where what we did didn't mean anything. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest just hours before wilted and turned to ash. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. His promised text never came. My own texts to him, casual and carefully worded inquiries about his day, were met with short, delayed responses. Busy at work, swamped, talk later. The excuses were flimsy and transparent. He was avoiding me. He was ghosting me. The couch in my living room felt enormous and empty, a monument to a closeness that had been erased. Every corner of my apartment seemed to hold a memory of him. The blanket we had shared, the mug he always used, the scent of his shampoo that still lingered faintly on a throw pillow. My sanctuary had become a museum of loss. The pain was a physical thing, a heavy, dense weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. It was a grief far sharper than the dull, chronic ache of my secret love had ever been. That old ache had been mingled with the comfort of his presence. This new pain was pure absence. After a week of this agonizing silence, I knew I couldn't let it go on. The ambiguity was eating me alive. I would rather have a clean, painful break than this slow, torturous death by 1,000 unanswered texts. I needed the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. If I had imagined it all, if I had ruined the most important friendship of my life by leaning into that kiss, then I needed to know. I needed to face the rubble I had created. So, with my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I walked the 10 blocks to his apartment. a journey that felt like crossing a barren and hostile desert. I stood outside his door for a full 5 minutes, my hand raised to knock, my courage failing me over and over. I was terrified of what I would find on the other side. Anger? Disgust? Pity? Finally, I forced myself to rap my knuckles against the wood. The sound was too loud in the quiet hallway. I heard movement inside, a pause, and then the sound of the lock turning. The door opened a few inches, and he was there, framed in the gap. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was a mess. He was wearing a shirt I hadn't seen in days, and it was wrinkled, as if he'd slept in it. He saw me, and for a second, a look of pure, unadulterated panic flashed across his face. "Leo," he said, his voice a strained croak. He didn't open the door any wider. He was physically blocking me from entering his space, from entering his life. "We need to talk," I said, my own voice steadier than I felt. "You can't just disappear, Julian. Not after that." He winced at the mention of that, the kiss that now hung between us like a ghost. He scrubbed a hand over his face, a gesture of profound weariness. "Now's not a good time. When is a good time?" I pressed, a new, unfamiliar anger rising in me. It was anger born of hurt, the frustration of being treated like a shameful secret. "Are you ever going to talk to me again? Or was I just supposed to pretend last Thursday never happened? Was that the plan?" My words hit their mark. He flinched, and his defensive posture crumbled. He sighed, a long, ragged sound of defeat, and finally stepped back, pulling the door open. "Come in," he said, his voice resigned. His apartment was a mess. Clothes were strewn over chairs, takeout containers littered the coffee table, and the air was stale and heavy. It was the apartment of a man who was hiding from the world. It was clear he hadn't just been avoiding me. He'd been avoiding everything. We stood in the middle of the living room, a few feet apart, the silence stretching taut between us. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at a spot on the floor, his jaw tight. "Just tell me the truth," I said, my voice softer now. The anger had dissipated, leaving only a deep, aching sadness. "If it was a mistake, just say it. If you regret it, just tell me. I can take it. But the silence, Julian. This is what's killing me. I need to know what I am to you. Am I your friend? Was I just a convenient comfort while you were hurting? What was all of that? What was that kiss?" He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were swimming with a confusion so profound it stole my breath. He looked like a lost child. "I don't know," he whispered, and the words were fractured, broken. "Leo, I swear to God, I don't know." He sank onto his couch, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know what's happening," he said, his voice muffled. "All I know is that for the last 3 months, the only place I felt safe was with you. The only time my brain would shut up, the only time I didn't feel like I was falling apart, was when I was on your couch, when you were there. It was the only thing that felt real." He looked up at me, his face a mask of desperation. "And then I kissed you, and it felt more real than anything. It was like coming home." It scared the hell out of me. He stood up and began to pace, running his hands through his hair in agitation. "This isn't me, Leo. This isn't who I am. I date women. I've always dated women. My family, my friends. Everyone knows me as this one thing. And now I don't know what I am. When I'm with you, none of that seems to matter. But when I'm here, alone, in this apartment, all I can think about is how I've broken some fundamental rule. How I've messed everything up. I messed up our friendship. I dragged you into my mess. You didn't drag me into anything," I said, stepping towards him. "Julian, look at me." He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his expression tormented. "Did you think you were the only one feeling something on that couch? Did you think I was just a piece of furniture? For months, you held me like I was the most important thing in your world. And then you would tell me it didn't mean anything. Do you have any idea what that was like for me?" Tears pricked at the back of my eyes, but I forced them down. "I have been in love with you for 10 years, Julian," I said, and the confession, the secret I had guarded for a third of my life, finally broke free. It hung in the air between us, immense and irrevocable. His eyes widened, his mouth falling open slightly in shock. I buried it because I valued our friendship more than anything. I was happy to just be your friend. But then you came to me, and you blurred every line, and you broke down every wall. You started it. You initiated everything. You can't kiss me like you did, and then run away because it scares you. That's not fair. It's not fair to me. The silence that followed my confession was absolute. He stared at me, his face a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, disbelief, confusion, and then, slowly, a dawning, painful understanding. It was as if all the disparate, confusing pieces of the last few months had suddenly slammed into place for him. He saw it all: his own unconscious needs, my patient silence, the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. 10 years, he whispered, his voice full of a new, quiet awe. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He closed the distance between us, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped right in front of me, so close I could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He reached out, not with the panicked confusion of before, but with a new, trembling certainty, and he took my hand. His fingers laced with mine, a firm, grounding pressure. I'm so sorry, Leo, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry I hurt you. I've been such a coward. I was so terrified of what it meant, about me, about us. I didn't even stop to think about what it must have been like for you. He looked down at our joined hands, then back up at my face. I don't have it all figured out. I don't know what to call this, or what it makes me. But I know one thing. He paused, taking a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say the most important words of his life. I know I don't want to go another day without you. Whatever this is, I want it. I want to figure it out. With you. And with that, the storm inside me finally broke. The fear, the anger, the years of pent-up longing, it all dissolved into a profound and overwhelming sense of relief. It wasn't a perfect, storybook ending. It was messy and complicated and frightening. But it was real. It was honest. He squeezed my hand, a silent promise. We had found our way back to each other, not through the comfortable, well-worn paths of our old friendship, but through a new, uncharted territory. And for the first time, we were going to navigate it together. The conversation that followed was the most honest one of our lives. We sat on his messy couch, our hands still linked between us, and we talked for hours. He told me about the deep, gnawing loneliness he had felt even when he was with Chloe, a sense that some essential part of him was not being seen or understood. He talked about the quiet safety he felt with me, how my calm presence had always been a balm to his restless energy. He admitted that his repeated insistence that our nightly ritual didn't mean anything was a desperate attempt to convince himself, not me. It was a shield against a truth his heart was beginning to understand, but his mind refused to accept. I, in turn, opened the door to my secret room and let him see inside. I told him about the party in college, about the years of watching him date other people, about the quiet ache that had become a permanent part of my existence. I told him about the nightly torture and bliss of holding him on my couch, of being so close to what I wanted and believing it was forever out of reach. There were tears from both of us. Tears of regret for the years of miscommunication, tears of fear for the uncertain road ahead, and tears of a profound, bone-deep relief at finally being seen, finally being known. We didn't solve everything that night. We didn't put a neat label on our relationship or plan out the rest of our lives. What we did was lay a new foundation. We cleared away the rubble of unspoken feelings, plausible deniability, and fear. In its place, we laid the first, solid stones of honesty and intention. We agreed to take it one day at a time, to learn this new language between us together. When the sky outside began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, we were both utterly exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the satisfying exhaustion that comes after a long and arduous journey, when you have finally arrived. Come home, I said quietly, my voice raspy from hours of talking. Come back to my apartment. He looked around at his own place, at the disarray that was a perfect reflection of his internal chaos. Then he looked at me, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Okay, he said. The walk back to my apartment was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was a comfortable, settled silence. The sun was rising, casting the city in a soft, golden light, and it felt like a new beginning. When we got back to my place, the first thing he did was walk over to the couch. He picked up the throw pillow where his scent still lingered and held it for a moment. Then he looked at me. "I'm tired of the couch," he said softly. He walked past the living room and down the short hallway to my bedroom. He stopped at the open door, a threshold he had never intentionally crossed in this new context, and waited for me. I followed him, my heart doing a slow, steady beat, no longer frantic but filled with a quiet, hopeful rhythm. That night, for the first time, we slept in my bed. There was no pretense of a movie, no excuse of exhaustion. He simply turned to me in the dark, wrapped his arms around me, and pulled me close. He buried his face in my neck, just as he had done so many times on the couch. But this time, there was no anxiety, no ambiguity. It was not an act of desperate comfort-seeking. It was a clear and deliberate choice. It was an embrace that said, "I am here. I am not running away. This is where I want to be." In the weeks and months that followed, we began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. The new normal was quieter than our old friendship, but infinitely more profound. It was built of small, intentional intimacies. It was him bringing me coffee in the mornings, learning exactly how I liked it. It was me watching him work, fascinated by the focused intensity he brought to his lines of code. It was cooking dinner together in my small kitchen, our bodies moving in an easy, familiar dance. It was him finally clearing out his ghost ship of an apartment and moving his things, his life, into my sanctuary, which was now our home. The door to my bedroom was never a question again. It was simply our space. Sometimes, late at night, I would find him just looking at me with a sort of quiet wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe we had found our way here. And in those moments, I knew that the greatest risks, the ones that threaten to bring your entire world crashing down, are sometimes the only ones that can lead you to a place of true and lasting shelter. We had stopped being a structure of unspoken rules and locked rooms, and had become a home, built not on a foundation of denial, but on the simple, solid truth of a hand held firmly in the dark.